Story time. My husband has this pattern of reaching out to people who are solid when he sees they're engaged in an area of work related to the work of NWM. He asks to connect them with me in hopes of future collaboration or simply for more of a network for me, as this whole starting a nonprofit thing can feel isolating sometimes. This habit of his is how I met Lemon Price. After what ended up being a longer phone call than planned, which covered a lot more territory than planned, I hung up with this nagging feeling. I think she might be the perfect fit as Reclamation's new co-host. I had been wanting a co-host for months, but had yet to find that person, the one with the right chemistry, experience, knowledge, interests, as well as the capacity to help bring this podcast to the next level. I decided to take the risk of looking ridiculous and sent her a follow-up email within the hour. If I'm crazy, then so is she, because she said yes. You're about to listen to Lemon's story. We wanted to introduce you to her in this way first so that you can get to know her a bit, as I've had the privilege of doing. From here, we plan to jump into all kinds of topics that we are deeply passionate about. While many of these topics may feel overplayed out there, we are committed to our audience, to those who have suffered from religious abuse, who are considering exiting their cult group, those supporting a loved one who's been harmed, and everyone wanting to minimize the risk of revictimization or victimization. These conversations are curated for you. Thank you for being here. Lemon, thank you so much for recording this again with me. So listeners, Lemon and I recorded her story already, and we were just laughing about how we don't even know if we remember what we said. We were feverish. We were coughing. We sounded awful. Her husband, who does sound tech stuff, listened to it to try to fix it and was like, you guys, this isn't going to work.
He said we sounded like we were dying.
And we kind of felt like we were. So that is an example of commitment, but also potentially poor boundaries. We should have rescheduled. So we are bringing you round 2 of Lemon's story, and we're super excited to jump in because she has a really amazing story to tell, and the perspective she brings with her story is really rare because she's combining education and increased knowledge with her experience, which I always love to bring to you because it's a richer example for you to glean from yourselves as you step forward in your own journey. So with that, Lemon, to get us started, would you please tell us what was your belief system growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up anti-Christian, actually. My grandparents had a terrible experience with their religion early in their marriage, and so it completely shut them off from any type of organized religion in any way, shape, or form. And so that sort of trickled down into an anti-religion and if you believe in God or attend a church, then there's something wrong with you, and no intelligent, reasonable person would go to church or believe in, the Bible or anything like that. And so sort of how I was raised, to be very skeptical and weary of people who had this belief, right? I was taught that they were intellectually inferior to me.
I think it's really interesting to hear you say anti-religion because I certainly know people who feel that way and who live out being anti-religious. I recently heard about a group out there. Actually, it's an organization that's just getting going that seemingly wants to help people out of cults and be like, we're not a part of that anymore, which is such a good message. I've made my exit. I'm not a part of this anymore. And yet behind the scenes, they actually have an anti-religious focus. So it's not just we don't want people in cults. It's we don't want people affiliated with Christianity or Judaism or any of this. So they have this kind of hidden agenda, I would say. Maybe not totally hidden, but not, in your face that that's what they're working to do either. And so I see this, I see it lived out, but I don't usually hear people really own it the way you just did. And I'm just curious, were your parents that upfront about it, or was it more that's your assessment of how they lived?
Yeah, they were super upfront about it, actually. There was a ton of conversations just about how like dumb religious people are and what a big mistake it is. And I mean, it was very blatant, which was really interesting too, because my mom always wore like her cross necklace and things. And like, but then the conversation like didn't match and like the attitude just didn't match. Like, you know, I was baptized in like a Methodist church because that was like important to my dad and things. And so like we did like things, but it wasn't. And I even went to church. It was really interesting. They sent me to church when I was little, but they didn't go to church. And so like and there was like a lot of us that it was like that where our parents didn't go, but the kids went. And so like a school bus would pick you up on Sunday mornings for church and things, but your parents didn't go. And then that stopped.
Well, I can tell you a parent motivator for that.
Right?
Free childcare.
And so like I did that until probably like second grade or so. And then unintentionally, I ended up missing the bus. And of course, this is like before cell phones and things. And I was like, you know, in first or second grade. And so I was wandering the church. There was no more adults there and things like that. And so it took like 2+ hours to figure out where I was and things like that. And so I stopped going then. And as I got older, then the conversation was really like, you are an idiot, basically, if you believe in God and follow this model.
Well, and I said that jokingly. I mean, as a mom with a young kiddo being like, ooh, free childcare, that's nice. And of course, there could have easily been other reasons to it. So I just wanted to clarify that I'm kidding. Maybe it's true, but maybe it's not. It's also possible that they wanted you to still have exposure and to have an opportunity to make your own decision and to see different views and things. So I'm curious, though, with that. Okay, so you started with some idea of God and Christian form, a denomination of Christianity, and then wound up in this, you're stupid, you're dumb if you believe in God and you have a religious affiliation. And then you wound up in an unhealthy religious group. So can you tell me how you transitioned from B to C? How did you go from you're stupid if you're in religion to being a part of a group itself?
So I've always known since I was a kid that I grew up in the Northeast and I knew this wasn't the place for me. And I was like, I'm going to move to the South. I'm going to marry like a Christian man. We're going to have our little, all of our boys, and they're going to play football and we're going to go to church on Sundays. And at 10, this was my life vision. And so, and my family was super dysfunctional. My parents split when I was 10, and that was a super unhealthy situation. My neighbors actually were part of this religious group, and they seemed so happy. They have this huge family. They were insanely happy. Their marriage just is even to this day, I mean, they're super rock solid. And I just admired their family and just their marriage and things so much. And so they invited me to a Bible study at their house. And I was like, no, I'm not, I'm good. I'm in graduate school. I don't have time for this. And they were like, I know you're home during this time because obviously we're neighbors and I can see that your car's here. And two, I'll feed you. It's an hour of your time once a week, and I'll feed you. And I'm like, I am so in for that because I'm a poor grad school student and she makes the best food. And so I was like, I'm in. And then it wasn't necessarily a Bible study. It was a focus on other religious texts that they hold of equal value. And I didn't know any better. Right? I'm they're sitting there talking about just this wonderful, family focus and, preaching about Jesus and things. And I'm like, okay, this is all the same then, and I wanted so badly what they had. And so I was baptized super, super quick. It was 3 weeks.
Wow.
So I was baptized super fast. And I remember it being a super, big point of contention with my mom and things. She was furious about it. But I was like, nope, this is right. The church is true. This is where I'm supposed to be. And then it very quickly, revealed itself to be very unhealthy. But I think it was just this presentation of this happy family unit and knowing them for so long, right? I met them when I was 10 and I was 24 when I was baptized, right? So for a large part of a majority of my life, they were the healthy, functioning model of a family unit. And they credit the church and their beliefs for the reason their family is so healthy and strong. And so I'm like, of course I want that, of course I want that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just spoke so well to how people generally can find themselves in situations like this. It's that the group, the leader, the recruiter, whomever you're talking to, they're speaking to something that you're desiring inside. Like they're speaking to an unmet need or this ache that you have, an unmet desire for your life, for your community. And you can see the potential through what they have to offer. And it sounds like that's what was going on with you, is that, yeah, it was really speaking to the heart of what you were hoping for.
Yeah. And I think that's something that they're really good at, because I don't think my neighbors, right? Like they definitely did not have malicious intent. They were raised in this group and things. And so that's the only thing they know. And that's the big message of this church, is to go out and preach the gospel and invite people to learn more and things. And so, and I mean, even after I was baptized, I'm like, I'm so happy. This is exactly what I want. And so I was like, of course I want to share this with people and tell people about why I'm so happy and things, right? It was never done maliciously. And I think their big focus on family, right, is it makes it almost easier, because we see how dysfunctional family is in society right now. And so this is, so many people, right, are coming from broken homes, and like 50% of marriages end in divorce. And I saw like a ton of staggering like statistics from the 2019 census, like 25% of children like grow up in broken homes and things like that. And so their divorce rate is it's like less than 10%. And they have these huge, very happy, like successful families. And so even just like modeling that behavior and then inviting people, right, it's super appealing, because that's the church's focus as a whole, is family. And then to see so much brokenness in family, right, it just makes sense that people would want that. It's like a very easy like recruiting tactic.
You're absolutely right. From my experience and my research, I would say that the majority of groups who are living out an aspect of community in a good way, where it looks good and it looks appealing, they're not maliciously advertising that. There really is genuine buy-in, where there are pros to the situation, or there are at least apparent pros to the situation. Groups that are unhealthy, it doesn't mean that every single thing that they do and that they believe is wrong and unhealthy. It's usually going to be a mix. And while there are groups out there, I know of some that it is malicious and it is a tactic. I know of a group that actually literally profiles people that they're interacting with based on their personality type and how they've assessed them, so that they know what to approach them with to recruit them. They know what to actually tap into. So there are groups that do that. There are other groups like what you're talking about, where they're genuinely living out what they believe, but there are aspects to what they believe that are twisted and ultimately are harmful and damaging and cause a lot of pain and suffering for people, which of course we'll get to in your own personal story. So I appreciate you pointing that out. No, I'm definitely not saying that every interaction with someone in an unhealthy group, there's an intent to cause harm. Oftentimes it's just an intent to share because they really believe it and they really see pros to their situation. They want to share that with others.
Yeah. And there was definitely like pros to the organization, right? There's so many things they did well that, and I was just talking to a friend about this. I'm like, there's things that I would love to take from that experience and apply it to like mainstream Christian, like they do community insanely well. No matter where you would go in the world, like you have an instant community and people willing to help and support you and nurture you. They do family super well, right? And there's a lot of intentionality and focus on family. And then there's like so many other things that are very wrong, like very, very wrong. But there are things that they do so well, and that's what's appealing, right? And I know people who stay solely because of the appealing parts, and they're willing to like ignore the bad because they do these very important things well.
And the first time I walked away and Googled some stuff because I thought, well, gosh, there's some things I wouldn't mind learning from this group and utilizing in my own household. I feel like I'm in a position to do that. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. Just, if you're not sure if you've really got your feet under you, and that what questions to ask and where to get information, what's solid information, how to assess where the research came from and all those sorts of good practices. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do that, but I felt confident saying, I want to go look up this specific practice and actually learn about it a little bit, because it's just a way that they function in the household. I think you had talked about, these forms of family meetings that they have and how they have a weekly family meeting and how they structure that. I'm like, wow, we've talked about doing something like that before. And as our son gets older and we're looking at the week ahead, I could see something like that really benefiting our family. So that's an idea. It's more of a cultural practice. I'm certainly not investigating their doctrinal practices so that I can bring those into my household. But some of those cultural practices, yeah, they can be better than what I've seen done in Christianity, mainstream Christianity, than I've seen done pretty much anywhere, to be honest. I mean, anyone who's heard me and knows my story knows that I've really struggled with community. I struggle with trusting community sometimes. That's been a long road for me. And I haven't seen it done great. It's just the truth. I haven't seen it done great. And so to see an organization that's doing it really well, that I get the appeal.
Yeah, they were so good. Like, I remember moving down to Georgia and there were people contacting me beforehand from down here, right? I'd never been down here. And, there was a men at my house ready to move furniture for me. There was women who had prepared meals for me so I didn't have to cook. Like, when I had rotator cuff surgery, there was somebody at my house every single day providing dinner for my family, making sure because I wasn't allowed to vacuum. I wasn't allowed to do anything, just doing things like that for me. And they really, without me asking, right? They saw a need and then they met the need. And I'm like, I wish we could be better about that, in some aspects. And then the family meetings, I think they were so good. They had 2 types. So you had a family council once a week where you could, and they encouraged you, right? It wasn't mandatory, but this was an encouragement, was to go and, hey, here's what's on the schedule this week. And here's where I'm going to need support. And here's something I need to address. And just having this dedicated time to just make sure everybody's on the same page for the week. And looking ahead. And then they did a family home evening. And that was a church-wide thing. There was no church meetings. There was nothing happening one specific day of the week. So families could have this dedicated time to study together. You might watch a movie or play games. And there was always some kind of snack involved. And I'm this is so good. I love that, right? We still do that with our kids. We make sure there's dedicated time once a week where we're just in a devotional or, there's some sort of spiritual lesson going on and making sure it's super fun for them. So there was so much that was super appealing. And then there was so much that was problematic.
The problematic piece, because I think what happens is we see these really good aspects and they're pulling at our hearts. They're speaking to us on a deep level. And because of that, we maybe are too quick to overlook the rest, or maybe to not even ask about the rest. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation that we really wish we had not gotten into. So what would you say were the main tenets of this group?
So the big thing, so they don't believe in the Trinity, right? So they believe in exaltation. And so God is an exalted being in their stance. So he was human somewhere else and did all of the right rituals and held the right beliefs and things to become an exalted being and then create his own planet. Same with Jesus, right? Jesus is an exalted being because it did the things he was supposed to. And so this denial of the Trinity, and that was super hard for me too, coming out of that because of the way they talked about the Trinity. It took a very long time for me to wrap my brain around this, and it's only from going to school and studying Greek and Hebrew to understand the Trinity. So that was a big thing. And then they believe that you and I could be exalted if we do all of the right things and perform these rituals in the temple and things. Then one day we can have our own planets and be gods, which is actually the big thing that my husband pointed out. He was that is totally a satanic view. And when he said that, it was the light bulb went off. And I was wait a minute. I'm that's totally what Satan tempted Eve with, is that she could be like God. And so I'm that makes sense. That would be a satanic view. I'm but then that's super interesting that's that is the thing that everybody in this church is working toward, is to be their own God someday and to have their own planet Like that's the number one goal.
And can you tie that in a little bit more for us about, because I think you told me last time that your husband spent some time in that worldview, correct?
Yeah.
So it's not, there's more to this, I think.
Yeah. So my husband, he super rebelled and he got into paganism and things, and then studied Satanism a little bit, and he actually has like a pagan tattoo, and he's like, I need to cover this. It stresses him out all the time. But I remember like when we first got together, like going through his closet, and like, I mean, he had the full on like satanic robes, like walking down that path. And so when he pointed that out, and he met with the missionaries too of the church, and he started pointing these things out, and they're like, oh, I've never heard of that. And I've never made that connection before and things. And so when he pointed it out, I was like, it was sort of like and I'd already left the church because of some like harmful experiences that I had with them. But when we had considered like going back as a family, like I was willing to put all of the like trauma aside to go back, because they do such a good job of like indoctrinating you and telling you like you're not going to be happy, your family is not going to be together, all these things. And so I was like, okay, maybe we need to go back. And then when he pointed that out, it was like the thread that like unraveled everything. And then I could see all of the paradoxes, and I could see just so many of the harmful like doctrine and things. And even now, I mean, I left almost 4 years ago, I guess. And like he'll see something on TikTok and he'll be like, was this your experience? Did you have this experience? I'm like, yep. Totally had that. And he's like, he constantly is apologizing. He's like, I can't believe like this is an experience that you had. Like, and he's like, how are you a functioning adult now? And I'm like, well, we're here. But really, like, I'm so thankful for, and he says it all the time. He's like, I'm so thankful that I had walked down like this terrible path. He's like, because then he's like, then I had the insight to give you. Yeah, I was like, because I would have no idea that that's a Satanist view, and I've definitely never in my life have I been like, I wonder what Satanists believe, and so like, there's never been like that appeal. And so for him to have that insight and knowledge, I'm just like, I tell him all the time, I'm like, I'm just so thankful like God introduced us when he did. And that the experiences that we had have just been so like complementary to one another. And it's been very insightful just to, the more we talk about it too, the more he's like, yep, this comes from this viewpoint or from this viewpoint. And I'm like, wow, I would have never known. I would have never known.
And oftentimes in situations like this, whether someone was in a cult, they endured religious abuse or harm in some form, someone was involved with something more on the fringes, that like satanic SRA, satanic ritual abuse. I've had the privilege, good heavens, of speaking with someone who endured that for several years of her life. These stories are really, really hard to tell. Oftentimes people feel ashamed when they tell them. They feel like they should have known better, or they should have known somehow. Like, how did this happen? And so people can feel unintelligent, or they can feel ashamed of their experience. And so they don't want to reach out and say, hey, this is what's going on, or this is what's happened. And because of that stigma attached to it, they don't really get the support that they need. They don't gain the understanding that would benefit them in their own healing process and moving forward. Yeah. And additionally, other people don't get to learn from them. And so the darkness surrounding all this, the like keep it quiet, the shame that keeps people quiet, that's something that we really want to undo. We want to unravel that and remove it, because sharing serves us and it serves others. And I don't always mean sharing in a public forum. That's not necessarily what an individual needs. It depends on the person and where they're at. Some may never share publicly, and that's great. But to be able to at least find some safe people to bring into that conversation goes so far.
Yeah, And I totally get that, right? Because that's how I felt, right? Because, when I came out and realized like how harmful so many of these things were, I felt so stupid, and I'm like, how could I let myself get there? And then of course, it's not like I was presented with the full scope of things, right? Like I wasn't given the full truth. I was presented with happy families. And so, and then it, as you go, the longer you're there and the deeper you get, the more is revealed and things. And then you can see it. And so all that to say, like, right, I've had to work through like that shame and that guilt and the concern. And I'm just now getting to a place where I'm like sharing, and it's been years, like, And so it is hard. It's hard, but it's super important. It is super important. And I know like my husband feels that way all the time too. He's like, I can't believe I had these experiences, and he doesn't usually talk about them, and I know when he met with the missionaries too, like they made him feel terrible about the things that he had done and wanted like public confession from him and all kinds of things. And it just made him feel so worthless and small and terrible about things that he did at like 15,
Oh, gosh.
And so I totally understand the feeling, and it is super hard to come out of.
I know you mentioned it's been several years, and it takes time. Sometimes we need to just sit with it ourselves for a little bit. And then, like I said, start welcoming some people into that with us. Depends on the person. But anyone who is going to further shame someone for a past experience they've had that they're trying to recover from and move forward from, that is certainly not the model that Jesus Christ gave us. So people need to own that for themselves. They can't put his name on it because that is not how he showed us to handle things. So yes, it does happen. And for anyone out there who has had that happen, please know that that has nothing to do with Christ, has nothing to do with Christianity, has everything to do with the failure of the person that's interacting with you.
Yeah. Yeah. That is something I've had to like remind myself, right? Like this isn't God's fault. It's not Christ's fault, right? We live in an imperfect world with sinful people, and mistakes are made. That's not a reflection of who God is.
While you were an active participant in this group, what was your view of God then, especially in relation to these expectations that were placed on your life?
Yeah, so it was very much like a reward and punishment situation, right? So it was really interesting. Like the view was like God's here to like make you happy and not the other way around. But then it's like if you do something that is displeasing, then like you should expect like consequence for that. So like a prime example, you would get this one time in your life, you get a patriarchal blessing, and you meet with the patriarch, and they give you quote unquote like divine revelation from God just for you. And in mine, it said that my husband and I would have physical children, which was super important to me at that time because I had already miscarried multiple times. And so I was like, okay, like this is what God's promising me, like, okay, so I just have to be patient. And then when my husband and I got together and things, I was like miscarrying and miscarrying and miscarrying. And I was like, what is wrong? And the doctor at first couldn't find anything wrong. And then, we later found a tumor, and I had to have a hysterectomy. And I remember like, even like, and I'd already left, and I found my patriarchal blessing like in a drawer in like a dresser we never use. And I remember looking at it and being like, did God like give me this tumor and this hysterectomy because I like wasn't faithful, because I didn't open my scriptures, because I wasn't going to the temple enough? Like what did I do? Like this must be a direct punishment from God because I didn't do the things that I was supposed to. Maybe I didn't tithe enough. Right. And so, and they frame like there's all these worthiness questions that you have to answer every 2 years to your like direct church leader and then like the region's church leaders. And it's the same set of questions. And you have to go through this like two-prong interview every like 2 years. And it's about like your behavior and in how you relate to God. And then they decide whether you're worthy enough to like go to the temple and have these and do these rituals and things that, and the way they always framed it is like, if you're not temple worthy, then like what's going to happen during the second coming? Like this is your card to heaven, basically. And so if you're not doing these things, then you're basically just not worthy to be in heaven at all. And God's not going to see you as worthy.
Oh my gosh. And to go through so many losses through your attempts to become a mom and to have that be framed as your fault, that is heartbreaking. And I can only imagine the pain that would go along with that. The closest I can get to that, Lemon, in trying to understand is that I had been told that if I became pregnant, there was something wrong with my uterus. And so if I became pregnant, I could become pregnant, but I wouldn't be able to carry past the first trimester. And so the baby would naturally abort itself. And so I wouldn't actually have the baby. And so when we got pregnant, it was an accident and I was devastated. Like when I took the pregnancy test and saw that I was pregnant, I was on the floor crying. I felt like I was a horrible human being. I had been incredibly irresponsible. Even after, I've been married like 6 years or something, and I'm feeling irresponsible that I got pregnant, and just, I felt like I had murdered my baby. That's what it felt like. And so that's the closest I can get, is I did something and now this unborn child is going to suffer and it's my fault.
Yeah, that's totally I get that framework completely where it's, you miscarried because you weren't faithful enough, or, your husband didn't open his scriptures enough. And so therefore, like, God doesn't want to give you this baby because you're not fit parents, because you're not doing what he's asked you to do. And it was super hard. Even when we made the decision to have the hysterectomy, I'm like, is this, and I had already been out for like 3 years at that point. And I'm like, did I do this? And my husband's like, no, like you did not do that. Like, God is not punishing you. This is not, and I had to really wrestle with it and work it out. And we found out I had the tumor in July, and it took me all the way until March to schedule the hysterectomy because it took me that long to work through just this framework that I had been given, and feeling like I was a complete failure, and like feeling like I let my husband down, right? Because our number one job as a woman is to bring children into this world. And so I'm like, I've completely let you down as a woman, as a wife. I've disappointed God somehow. And it took a long time for me to even like have this medically necessary surgery. And this whole time this tumor was growing because I just could not grapple with like the unworthiness that I felt.
Yeah. In many groups, women are defined by their ability to birth children and raise them and take care of the home. And so if a woman is unable to meet that expectation for one reason or another, their value is just shot within the group. And Lemon, would you be open to responding to this yourself? Because I know that you can. What's actually true?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, like, honestly, I tell Glenn this all the time, right? Like, God did not punish me. And I can look back in hindsight and, like see the blessing and see God's hand in things. And, there's so many positives that came from this, and I'm not defined by my womb or lack thereof. And, there is a plan for everything, and I may not understand it in the moment, but God does have a plan. And, he didn't cause a tumor because, I didn't read this other religious text enough or pay enough money to church or something like that. Like, there's a reason, and I'm okay with whatever that reason is.
And it's not about works, right?
Yeah, it's not. And that was the big thing, right? This is very much it was a group about the works that you do, and your actions define the level of salvation in which you have and things. And so it was very interesting because it's not like they don't present it in a like pay for salvation type of a situation or a works-based thing, but then the worthiness questions are based on your works. They're based on how much you tithe. There's actually at the end of the year like a settlement meeting with the clerk to go over how much money you tithed, and then they ask you if that's an accurate representation of 10% of your income, and if it's not, they ask you to settle up right then and there, so that way you are still temple worthy, which is just it was super interesting. And so even though it wasn't presented as a works-based philosophy, the questions are designed to test your worthiness as like a human being, and your relationship to God is based on your behaviors.
And here's the thing, we're not worthy.
Yeah.
We're not worthy of Jesus dying for us. We're not worthy of that. And he did it anyway. And that's the beauty in it, right? That's what grace is. It's like, no, you don't necessarily deserve it, but I'm just going to freely give it to you anyway. Like, I love you that much. I see you as having worth. So I'm giving you that worth, and you don't owe me. You can't
Repay it.
pay that back. Yeah, you can't. And that is the beauty of the grace in the Christian view through Jesus Christ. You can't actually earn it. You can only accept it and then show gratitude for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Lemon, did any of this play into your actual exit from the group, or would you please share what was your catalyst?
Yeah, so the big thing was, so my ex-husband got addicted to opioids after a military injury, and we presented at church like very, faithful members of this group, and we were hosting people all the time and doing the same things my neighbor did. And when I joined, and so the addiction just became way too much. And like we went to move out of our apartment, and I checked our account, and there was like $50 in my checking account because he had taken all of it out to buy opioids, and started getting aggressive and things with me. And so when I went to my church leaders about it, I was like, listen, like I need help, like he I have a friend who works for like a domestic violence shelter, and she called me and she was just asking me a few things. And after she asked me these questions, she was like, so that's like the analysis that we give people when they come here or call to assess how bad their situation is. And she's like, you scored like the max, like you need to get out right away. And so I was like, okay. So I went to my church leaders about it, hoping, because I lived near all of his family. And I was nowhere necessarily near mine. And they accused me of being an adulterer and like slandering this good man's name and things. Because we presented so well at church that they could not fathom this. And then when I moved, they had actually called the bishopric down here and said the same thing, that I was going to that I needed like some counseling before I was dating and things again, because clearly I had issues to work out, and that's when I was told like, I should stop working and things, and I need to just focus on growing my relationship with God so I can be the wife and mother that somebody actually deserved and could fulfill that role. And that happened right before my grandfather passed. And so I was going home. And I called them and I was like, hey, listen, I can't fulfill my calling in church for the next few weeks. My grandfather's passing. I'm going back home to be with him. And just getting that distance and nobody really calling and reaching out gave me a lot of perspective on just the whole situation. And so I never went back after that.
Did anyone try to reach out to you and bring you back in?
All the time. People reach out constantly. And I have a ton of friends who are still in the church. Like I grew up with a lot of people in the church. And so some of my friends growing up are still members. Like I still see my neighbor all the time when I go back home and things. And, she's so sweet. She's always like, we're just, praying that you'll come back to church and things. And the leadership still reaches out to me. They reach out to my husband all the time to try to get us to do things. Even though we've sent like no contact forms from attorneys and things like that. They still try to reach out. I've actually had my neighbors in Pennsylvania tell me like, people from the church, even though like I haven't lived in Pennsylvania in 4 years, like missionaries will still come to the house to, see if we're there. Like they know where we are. She's like, we see them pop up like, every couple of months, they're next door and things. And so they don't really take no for an answer. And I get it, right? Because in their worldview, there is no salvation if you leave the church. Like, it's actually worse if you were a member of the church and then you left, because they take that as a direct like rejection of God. And so it's actually like 10 times worse to have been a member and then to leave. I totally understand why they reach out. It's not going to sway us, but I get why they do because of the way the belief system is structured.
Right. I can see that too, because there would be genuine concern that you're going to be left out.
Yeah, and the way their belief system is structured is there's not necessarily like hell, but there's 3 tiers of heaven and then an outer darkness where like you can't be resurrected, where you can't It's just like a void, I guess. And so if you believe in the church and then leave, like you're not even going to the bottom level of heaven, you are just straight outer darkness. And so I get it, right? That's a terrifying thing to think about, if that's a belief you hold and there's people you care about, the last thing you want is for them to end up in this void for eternity. And so I get it, why they reach out. It's from a very genuine and like caring and loving place.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it shows compassion for people. And so is that your view of it, or would you prefer that they just stop and leave you be?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would prefer they stop. And, I love my friends that are in the church, right, still. And so, I hope that they won't keep bringing it up, but I'm sure that they will. And then I actually said to my husband, I'm like, I can't wait for us to move out of our house and buy a new house, because then they won't know where we are. Like, because we've met with people down here, and so they do know where our house is now. And so I'm like, it'll be great when we move, and then they won't be able to track us down necessarily. I feel like a little bit differently about it, I guess, when it comes from like my friends who are, and they usually just make like one comment, they'll ask one question and they kind of sort of drop it, and you can tell it's from a very genuine, like sincere place. And it feels very different when it comes from like church leadership.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, especially with your past experiences with church leadership. Yeah. I can understand that would be less welcomed.
Yeah. Yeah. So the friends, I'm like, okay, that's, I could deal with it necessarily.
Right. Right. They love you. So that there's genuine care and compassion there.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you look back, how do you think this experience is still negatively impacting you?
So I would say like, I have like a very hard time like trusting myself and my judgment now. It's almost rare that you'll see me like speak on a topic or write about a topic without like thoroughly researching, like like I said, like I'm like taking Hebrew and things, right? Because I really want to understand like what exactly the scriptures say, because that was a big thing, right? Is they took the King James Version and manipulated it ever so slightly to fit their doctrine. And so now I'm like, I can't even necessarily trust the scripture like in the way that it is presented without going to check like the original text. Because I'm like, what if the publisher had some sort of bias, right? And so something is a little bit differently than it's supposed to be. And so it is definitely I have a hard time trusting myself, and I'm always very cautious to speak on anything without thoroughly researching it first now. And and even still then I worry that I'm going to get something wrong.
And for everyone listening, I want to add to that, because I don't want you to think that because you don't know Hebrew and Greek, you're screwed. There's nothing you can do, because Lemon and I resonate. Like, we get each other on this. Obviously, I'm at Denver Seminary. I might graduate someday. I might die there. We'll see what happens. But I think there's also this extra pressure, and it even says in scripture that if you're teaching on God's word, there's a higher level of accountability because you're influencing other people. And so she and I really feel that. We feel the weight of that. And we've seen people do it really badly, where people have really gotten deeply wounded. And so we have a concern. And I think the concern's healthy to a degree. And, Lemon, I won't speak for you, but maybe there's moments where it goes too far. And it's, we need to calm down the anxiety, and it almost gets to the point where no one would say anything at all, and that's not helpful either. But for those of you who are listening and are like, well, what on earth do I do? There are incredible scholars out there who have literally spent their lives in the original documents and put their stamp of approval on many of the translations that we have. And so what I recommend to you is that the kind of translation you're getting. And this can be a separate episode we do to give some people some basics on how to choose a translation. But we have word for word translations. Those tend to be a little bit harder to read. They're just not quite as easily understandable, especially if you're not used to reading a biblical text. And then we have paraphrased translations. And that's where, no, it's not word for word, but the meaning is still intact. And you'll see me oftentimes use the NIV for that reason. Some people don't like the New International Version. They say bad things about it. I also really like the ESV, but there's so many. There's only a couple really I think there's maybe 3 or 4 where I would say it's good to have some caution as you read it, because it's so different that you likely will lose the meaning. But there's a lot of room there. And again, people that are beyond what I will ever be have said that these are solid. And so I don't want you to have fear to pick up a Bible. I always recommend that you get a study Bible so that you get more context for the verse that you're reading, because context tends to be where we really slip up. Would you agree, Lemon? Like, you can get the context really matters, and we can, especially if we're reading like, oh, we're just going to read this one chapter, or oh, we saw this verse on a tapestry, on a shirt, sewn on a pillow, and it's like you don't have the context for the culture and the other verses that relate, and who was saying it, and who they were saying it to, and what was going on at the time. And those are the things that really bring to light for us what was being said then, so we can take that message and we can apply it accurately to what we're going through now. And study Bibles can help you to do that.
Yeah, that's like where my big focus is it's always on like what's going on politically, what's going on culturally. Like, I need to know that sort of information, because that was not important at all in the group that I was in, right? Like, we didn't study that. And that it makes sense because there are so many paradoxes in these other religious texts that of course they wouldn't want to spend time on, like cultural history or anything like that. And so it makes sense in their context. But having context is super important, right? Because there are so many verses that can be taken out of context and they change the whole meaning of things. And that's where I think I put a lot of my focus is like, and there's like resources online too, where if you're like, I just want to know what this word would be in Greek, like you can just Google it. And I think like Bible Hub does like a good job of showing you what it would be in Greek, or if it's the Old Testament in Hebrew, and then being able to look up what's going on culturally. And that to me makes the big difference. That's where I focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a strictly a cultural commentary as well that I really like. So it's specifically giving all those details about the festivals and what was going on that time of year and the seasons. And it really just brings, aside from of course, the importance of understanding what was being said, it also just brings it more alive.
Yeah.
Which to me it's fun. It makes me love it even more, because I can picture it better. Like, I can imagine what's happening, and that, it just enlivens it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think I get like more out of the scriptures, and I can see that these are real people with real lives, and there's something happening around them, and that's why this conversation, or this makes sense in the Bible than in relation to what's going on, and it's easier to apply and understand.
As you've had some time between exiting your group and now, I know you said it's been a few years, have you found anything positive from this experience that you've taken with you?
Yeah, so I would say like there was definitely like a lot of like good things they did. Like, daily scripture study was very important, right? And the way they do family, the way they do community, there were things that they did just very, very well that I have been able to, and it is all cultural, right? It wasn't like the culture, some of the culture was super good. And so from that, like my husband and I have been very intentional about some of those things and making it applicable to our life now. And I'm super thankful for the experience, right? Because I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't, have found the church I wouldn't have found that I'm at now. I wouldn't have met my husband without these experiences and things. And so there are definitely like positives, right? And I've had, because I've been more vocal about it too lately, I've had a ton of women who find themselves, hearing this story and saying, hey, I'm in this group and I've had these sort of experiences too. Can you help me leave? And so for that, I am definitely like eternally grateful, for that and just being able to help others. And so there were good things that came from it.
And I think you touched on it a little bit, but how has this portion of your story shaped you as a professional?
So I am actually in school now getting my MDiv in apologetics, and then I'll go get a PhD in apologetics and theology. And it's really just become like my life now, right? Like I love like pouring into women and just helping them feel like equipped, right? In which case it does feel so overwhelming sometimes, right? It does feel, I just read a post the other day. It was like your quiet time's not always going to be quiet, as a mom and things. And so it can feel just so overwhelming. And I never want it to feel that way for the women that I talk to. And just trying to, now I do just so much more work teaching like these apologetics concepts in a way that's attainable and accessible, and just providing resources to women so they feel confident, and then they can raise like confident children so they don't end up in these situations because they have a solid foundation.
And how has this shaped you relationally? So as a wife, a mother, a friend?
I think it has made me like more intentional as like a wife, mother, and friend. And like I said, there was a lot of like good things that they took about family in this group, and that, we still apply. Like they do follow like an Ephesians 5 model for your marriage insanely well. And so, that's something like my husband and I still like take with us and things. And the way that I relate to my children, right? They're always so calm and patient, and they're very intentional with their children's like education. And so there's things that I took about that too. And the way they do friendship they do that really well. And so I think it's made me just like way more intentional with how I relate to people and carry myself. And there was good things.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
There was good things.
Yeah. And it's really an incredible experience to come through something so hard that for me, again, I don't want to project this to you, but for me, like it almost took me out.
Yeah.
And to go through something so hard, and then to get to look back though and say, you know what, I don't think I would take it back.
Yeah.
And that's the power of God's redemption in a story, to be able to say that, because anyone in their right mind would take this back.
Right. Yeah. And if I had known, like if for some reason, if God had said to me, all right, you're going to go through these like experiences and it's going to be very traumatic and you're going to spend years wrestling with this, but on the other side, there's positives you will take away from it. Like, I don't know if I would have walked, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I would have walked that road. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I would have said yes to that plan. I don't know that I would have made that choice, and so looking back, I can see how there were positives, and there are things that like I can take away, and then God can use this experience to help other people, which I never in a million years saw that happening. I never saw myself ending up here, right? Like I've had my professors say, because of this insight, you should really do your dissertation on like cults and things. And I think this would be, we've never had anybody really do that because they don't have your experience. And so like you bring just this uniqueness, to the whole graduate school that we don't normally get. And so I can see just the positives in it.
Yeah. And I love that it's being embraced by the school, that you're not being made to feel like you don't fit, that they're embracing it. And I wanted to ask if you would please help clarify for me, because I'm afraid that I may have come across as tone deaf to our listeners by asking how this shaped you as a wife and a mother and a friend, because you've spoken of the miscarriages and of the hysterectomy. Now, I know that you are a mom, but our listeners have not heard you say anything about that. And so I just want to make sure, especially as we head into our last question, that that's clear for them. So would you mind sharing, just, you are a mama?
Yeah. So my husband has 2 boys from a previous marriage, and they're with us all the time. And I've been with them since my youngest was 4 and he's 8 now. And so in their mind, they're like, you're my mom. And that is what it is. And I love him so much because he has never once ever made me feel like a step parent. And the boys have never made me feel that way. And so I'm definitely like so eternally grateful just for the way that relationship has come about too. And so then I can look back on the miscarriages too. And I'm like, I'm so thankful, for those, because then I would be tied to my ex-husband who had these other issues. And I don't know that my marriage would look the way it does, and I'd be able to be a mom to these boys the way that they need one if that experience hadn't happened either. And so, yeah, it's so great. I love them. They're my babies. They're such mama's boys. And they're the best. They are the best. Like, they are the best. My youngest actually proposed to me a couple of years ago when he was in kindergarten, and bought a ring from the school store and things. And so I have it in a jewelry box, and he shows, all of our friends, like, this is the ring I gave my mom, because I love her so much. And they're just the best.
Oh my goodness. I can see you're just beaming. Like, you're so lit up right now. As you're thinking about them, if you were to issue them a warning in hopes of them never finding themselves in a similar situation to yours, what red flag would you want them to be aware of?
I would say, like, the biggest red flag to look for is, like, having your own version of something that's, like, generally accepted by a mainstream group, right? So they have the King James Version, as long as it is translated correctly by a very specific person, right? And so that, to me, should have been a red flag that they're the only ones that have this text and for this reason. And so, yeah, I think just having your own versions of something that is generally accepted is, like, a big red flag to look for.
Thank you so much.